Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Council of Urban Indian Health's Community of Learning. This is our second session on housing and homelessness and housing insecurity. I'm sorry. The title of this session is Building Safe Havens for Native American Youth and Adults Through Coalition Building. Will be a 60-minute conversation. We're featuring several speakers, and my name is Mark Clark. I'm the 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 senior thank you the senior project manager of technical assistance and the research center. I am going to serve as your host and in some respects a traffic cop today. I'll give you some housekeeping information. As you enter the room, I'm going to ask you that you put your name, title, your organization, and tribal affiliation in the chat box so that we can keep track of our participants, of course, and make it a more conversational feel. The community of learning itself is designed to be as conversational as possible. So we'll try and ensure that by also monitoring the chat box, and we'll discuss that in a moment. NCUI is the national nonprofit organization devoted to the support and development of quality, accessible, and culturally competent health and public health services for American Indians and Alaskan Natives living in urban areas. NCUI is the only national representative of the 41 Title V urban Indian organizations, UIOs, under the Indian Health Service Act in the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act. NCUI strives to improve the health of the over 70% of the American Indian and Alaska Native population that lives in urban areas, supported by quality, accessible health care. Now, a few housekeeping tips. This webinar is being recorded, and your mics have been muted unless otherwise directed as you enter the room. Please turn your camera on to allow for complete fun interaction amongst our participants. Again, the session is 1 hour in length. At any point in time, you can type questions into the chat box. I promise you we'll monitor the chat box and make sure that we answer as many questions as we're able to. This community of learning will have a question and answer session at the end, and all of our panelists will be available for that. The slides and the recording will be available at our homepage, and we'll put that in our chat box as well so that you'll have the link to it. There's an evaluation to follow at the end of the session, and we really welcome your feedback. We value your feedback, so I'd strongly encourage you to hang on and go to the SurveyMonkey online evaluation, because we really need to hear from you about not only about your preferences, but also about feedback about this particular session. Thank you. Next slide. So how do you ask a question or make a comment? Towards the bottom of your screen, you'll see the chat feature in your Zoom screen. You could simply put your cursor in the chat box and type your question or comment into the chat box, and that will appear on the right. There are other features that allow you to offer reactions that are nonverbal reactions, like a thumbs up sign, a hello sign, applause sign in the reactions feature. And of course, you're welcome to use those whenever you feel like reacting. We're looking forward to an engaging conversation. So we're beginning with polling questions, and want to first of all reassure you that your responses will be anonymous, but we're keeping track of the knowledge and gains that folks will possibly obtain from participating in our session. As a matter of fact, it's an indicator of that we will report to our funding agency of how successful we are with this particular session. So we ask that you answer the poll questions. Poll number 1 is, how comfortable do you feel about discussing the concept of safe havens for homeless youth? We'd ask that you choose one answer, make your selections, and once you've done that, look at poll number 2. How would you rate your knowledge of healthcare prevention and disease management programs for homeless youth? Again, we'd ask that you make one selection and one selection only for your response. So take a couple seconds to reflect on those questions and give us as accurate an answer as you can for our polls. Thank you. Don't forget, when you're done with your questions, you have to hit the submit feature. The poll results are as shown. We have almost a third of our audience feels very comfortable. Almost 60% feel either comfortable or very comfortable. So there are a lot of people who are acquainted with the notion of how to provide safe housing for homeless youth. At the same time, about 2/5 of our audience is either neutral or somewhat comfortable. So we'll work on those folks who are less comfortable and try and move you a notch up by the end of this session, because we want to increase your comfort and acquaintance with the topics of working with homeless youth and how to provide safety for them. I'm going to introduce our panelists now. Hold on just a moment. Our first speakers, I'm going to introduce, we have two panelists, there are 4 total, but our first 2 speakers right up out the bat is Paul Lumley, is the Executive Director for the Native American Youth and Family Center, NAYA, and is a citizen of the Yakama Nation. He came to NAYA in 2016 after being the Executive Director of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission from 2009. Prior to that, he was the Executive Director of the National American Indian Housing Council in Washington, D.C., and Senior Tribal Liaison with the U.S. Department of Defense. He worked at CRITIFC from 1987 to 2004 under several capacities. Mr. Lumley has an extensive history working with Northwest tribes and urban Indian communities. His co-presenter is Amy Thompson. She's a Master's of Social Work and is Director of Housing Services at the Native American Rehabilitation Association of the Northwest. She has over 30 years social service experience specializing in supportive housing for households with behavioral health needs who are experiencing long-term homelessness. She currently oversees supportive housing programs that provide outreach, engagement, housing placement, and long-term housing retention services with the focus on providing culturally specific services for Native Americans. Her previous experience includes overseeing integrated behavioral health and primary care services for Native Americans experiencing mental health challenges, inpatient psychiatric social work, and managing supportive housing sites. So I'd ask that you, again, give a welcome to Paul and Amy as they start their presentation. Next slide, please.
Thank you, everybody. And also thank you to the National Council of Urban Indian Health for the invitation to be here today. It's a great honor and a pleasure to be here. Amy and I are going to be talking about this housing project that we're working on. It's called Nisaika Ilihi, which is interpreted as our place in Chinook language, which is the local language and tribe in this area. The project was completed this year, and we finished our lease up as well. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about how this project started, and it really is guided by relationships. So as mentioned earlier, I used to be the executive director of the National American Indian Housing Council, and Sammy Joe DeFantorum was on the board, still is on the board for the Housing Council. And anyway, she's one of my old bosses. And I was at one of the regional housing meetings, and I ran into her, and it was so great to see her again. We hugged each other, and it's been several years since we've seen each other. And I told her about this project that NAYA was getting involved in just a half a mile from our campus. And we were really struggling with 6 of our other housing properties that didn't have Native preference, and we had a low percentage of Natives, and we should be interested in being an investor in the project with her Indian Housing Block Grant money. That's federal funding, and with that comes a waiver of the Fair Housing Act for Native preference. And she thought that was a really great idea and was concerned about having to really front shift a lot of funding. I said, actually, it's not that much. We don't need that much from you. We just need to have you be an investor of some kind. And so that's how it started. And then also at the same time, I was still fairly new at Native American Youth and Family Center, and starting to really blossom my relationship with the Native American Rehabilitation Association, and started really getting close to them and then getting close to us. And we decided that the way the theme of this project was, we really needed to have NARA, the American Rehabilitation Association, really needed to have them be a stronger partner because of the theme behind this. Call it a recovery house, and it's a place for community members who are struggling with recovering from drug and alcohol addiction, or those who want to live a drug and alcohol free lifestyle, and those who need mental health supports. And so we really needed NARA to be a partner. And so it was with these three relationships that this whole thing started. And this being just a half a mile from NAIA, which was amazing because, you know, NAIA, we have a 10-acre campus, we have a Native American high school, we have these wraparound services, and we knew with this broad range of services, we could really serve this community well, but we knew we also needed NARA's professional assistance, and so this relationship just blossomed. Next slide, please. So the backdrop of the community here in Portland, Oregon area is Multnomah County, and we have about 2.5% of the population is Native, but over 12% are homeless. So it's about five times overrepresented by census, and a huge percentage of them are Native families, and also more than half of the homeless Natives are also chronically homeless, meaning they've been living in the streets for over a year or have one or more disabling conditions. And you'll see the percentage here, 76% self-identify as being disabled, which is more than the overall population, and 27% with 3 or more conditions. So we know the data is not complete with the count. This is based primarily on the point in time count, which we know has limitations, but it is what we have, and it does indicate that we have a really big problem with homelessness in the Native community, and it's actually getting worse. It's much worse than the prior count. Next slide, please. So the building is, for us anyway, is pretty large. It's 59 units. It's all affordable housing. It's in the neighborhood we call the Coley neighborhood. And you can see the mix of studios, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedroom. And we wanted to make sure that there were some family units here as well. And we also have a couple of kids from our high school who are residing here as well. Next slide, please. So the partnerships were pretty broad, broader than I expected. The Native American Youth and Family Center, that's our acronym, NAIA. And so we're a co-owner and also service provider, and we brought in NARA for resident services and also our programming partner. The Sledge Tribe came in as an investor with their Indian Housing Block Grant, and with that they got 20 units out of the 59 for Native preference for 25 years. So we had to sign this binding agreement, which was actually pretty hard on the project because that agreement survives if one or all parties foreclose on the property. That still continues. That's a HUD requirement. So that was a hard thing to get passed, by the way, with the banks. Community development partners, that's the co-owner and developer of the project. The community mission-oriented developer. This is our first project. We have 2 other projects on the way with them, also in the Coley neighborhood. Viridian Property Management, they deal with the property itself and making sure the units are leased up and dealing with all of those issues. And then we have a couple of partners, Home For, which is the local housing authority. We'll talk later about some of the rental assistance they provided. And then there's an office called Joint Office of Homeless Services. That's a combination of the county and the city. They have a joint office together for just addressing homelessness, and they also provided rent services. Next slide, and I believe this is for Amy.
All right, hello everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. It really is an honor to present about this project. So Naseka Elahi is an affordable housing project, as Paul said, with a focus on recovery and on-site culturally specific support services that are available for all residents. So this picture here is a mural that was painted by the artist Toma Villa, and it's on the front of the building. The title of the mural is Grandmother's Prayers, and you can see it depicts an elder burning medicinal cedar. I feel like it really captures the healing aspect that's central to the mission of Naseka Elahi. We really focus on supporting families and individuals on their path to recovery and wellness. I should clarify that Nasaika Elahi is not a treatment program per se, and not every resident has a history of addiction. However, everyone does sign a lease addendum agreeing to an alcohol and drug-free environment. And we work really hard to promote an atmosphere of recovery for the residents. The reality is that some residents do struggle with sobriety, and so we've designed robust on-site services that can provide additional support for those individuals and really work with them and help them get back on the track that they want to be on. So for this next section, I'm going to highlight the role of NARA as the on-site service provider in this partnership. So next slide, please. So first, I just want to give a quick overview of NARA. We are a Native owned and operated nonprofit with a focus on clinical services. We utilize the medicine wheel in all aspects of our services and believe that a balance of physical, spiritual, emotional, and mental health brings about wellness. This picture I especially like is of our culture director, Philip Archibald. He passed away last year, but he worked at NARA for many, many years. And he always emphasized using the medicine wheel to guide all services and to guide the agency. And he, his role was to ensure that all of NARA services reflect all of the various cultures of the people that we serve and the community that we serve. And that continues on. We now have Leroy Big Boy as our culture director, and he continues to kind of keep the agency on track in that aspect. So our clinical services, as you can see, include primary health care. We have a dental clinic. We have a variety of behavioral health care services. And then we also have supportive services that are, that we feel are necessary for the people we serve to fully benefit from those healthcare and behavioral healthcare services. And so that includes housing support. So can we go to the next slide? So NARA's housing services, we provide a lot of different housing services and different collaborations and projects. It's really expanded over the past 5 years, and in large part that's due to support and collaboration with multiple agencies, and in particular with NAIA. We also collaborate, we have a very healthy collaboration with our local city and county joint office for homeless services that Paul mentioned. And one thing that this project, as Paul mentioned, was really the beginning of this kind of housing specific partnership between NARA and NAIA, and it's really been wonderful to be part of that, and just to see how we can bring NAIA's experience of developing and providing housing, and combine that with NARA's experience of providing that clinical support to residents. And so it's just a good blend of bringing together our different experiences. And we now have 2 other projects in the works, so that's very exciting. So NARA's housing services overall focus on providing clinical support to individuals who are experiencing or who are at risk of homelessness. Our permanent supportive housing model provides a long-term rent subsidy along with access to support services that are provided by credentialed staff with mental health credentials who have experience working with individuals experiencing homelessness and with a lot of behavioral health needs. We also have a position who's our coordinated entry assessor, and their role is to link homeless individuals and families with our local coordinated entry system. And I believe the next presentation is going to talk a little bit about that coordinated entry, what that means, and it's a requirement for HUD-funded services. And this project, we do have 10 units that are filled through the local coordinated entry system. So next slide. So while NARA is the on-site service provider at Nasaika Elahi, NAIA and Celeste also provide a lot of support. So NARA has a full-time staff person who's a resident services coordinator, and their role is to provide community building activities for residents and also to work with individuals and connect them to whatever external resources they may need. And the position also works extensively with property management with the goal of ensuring a safe environment for all residents. So for example, if a resident has a lease violation and the property manager needs to give the resident a notice, the resident services coordinator then follows up and steps in to help the resident with, resolving whatever the issue is that led up to that notice, with the goal of everybody working together to preserve someone's housing. So, next slide. So this picture shows our community garden, and the residents worked on this throughout the growing season. I want to note that our building was in the middle of leasing up when the COVID-19 pandemic hit Oregon in March, and that definitely created a lot of challenges. We managed to lease up the building. I think it was about the last 25% of the units were leased up after everything was shut down. So that required a lot of creativity, but we managed to do it. And obviously, COVID-19 has created a lot of challenges in implementing the support services as robustly as we had envisioned. We really want to create a strong sense of community among the residents, and that's very difficult when people cannot gather. So we have gotten creative in some workarounds. We do have regular community meetings via Zoom. For this community garden, what we did was we scheduled separate times for households to come down and work in the community garden so that people would be spread out and not a lot of people there at one time. During the summer, we held recovery support meetings outside. We have a covered parking area, so we blocked some of that off and had chairs set out, 10 feet apart. But despite all of that, it still feels like there's a lot more that we really want to do, and we're really looking forward to the time when we can fully implement our vision for on-site services. We want to provide, healthcare screening on site. NARA has a dental van that we would love to be able to come and have a dental day and do dental screenings for all the residents. Likewise, we sponsor women's wellness screening events where we can do mammograms and other basic health screenings. So we're really looking forward to a time when we can do that. And of course, the biggest thing that I think we're looking forward to is being able to have community meals together. The site has a beautiful large community room with doors, garage style doors that open to an outside patio. And it's just a great place to gather, and we haven't been able to utilize it, but we're really looking forward to the time we can do that. So next slide. So in addition to that full-time resident service coordinator, there's a lot of other staff from NARA's other programs that regularly visit the building to meet with individual residents, and also staff from the SLET's local office and from NAA's different programs also come and visit the program regularly, as much as we can, given the shutdown. So, so staff from NARA's addiction treatment and mental health programs work with individuals. There's a recovery coach who hosts a weekly Red Road group. They've had to suspend doing that for the time being, but they are usually there. And we also have master's level supportive housing specialists who support 10 of the residents in the building who also receive a long-term rent subsidy. And these are the 10 units that are filled through that coordinated entry system. These are individuals with a high level of behavioral health needs that we bring in extra staff to provide extra support for those folks. And so, and again, as I mentioned, a lot of staff from NAA's domestic violence program stopped by the building to work with some individuals. Staff A&D counselors from the SLET's local tribal office also support some of the tribal members living in the building. So this partnership between NARA, NAA, and SLET's is not only key to the development of this project and creating the building, but this partnership continues to grow through this collaboration of supportive services. And so from here, I'm going to turn it back over to Paul to talk more about the partnership with SLET's and other funding partners.
Thank you, Amy. Before I get started on this, I just wanted to say that you're seeing pictures of art on the exterior of the building, but there's art throughout the whole building. When you walk in, and there's a theme of basket designs on the outside of the building, in the pavement as you enter the building, and throughout the whole building. And we really wanted this to be a place where Native people walked up and they felt like, this is a Native building, and this is where I want to live. And I'm proud to live here with Native art throughout. And we also wanted this to be a gift to the Native, or to the local neighborhood. It used to be an area of blight. There was an old motel there and a closed down medical marijuana dispensary. And it was really just a bad part of the neighborhood. And so we wanted to give the neighborhood a gift, and we wanted to blend into the neighborhood. And because of that, we didn't have any complaints. There were no people complaining about this not being in their backyard. And I think because we included them all along the way, and we had this beautiful art that everybody could enjoy. It was a big part of how we wanted to project the project, not just the neighborhood, but to the people that live there. So as I mentioned before, the Indian Housing Block Grant was very useful in filling a capital financing gap in the project. It actually helped us complete the financing. The one piece that was really a challenge for us was getting the banks and other partners willing to go along with Native preference for these 20 units for 25 years, because there's no way that they could ever get out of that. They could never just everybody walk away from the project and then just start over. That lived on, and it's a federal requirement from HUD for 25 years that Siletz would always have that. And it was a big reason why the Siletz tribe wanted to be involved, because even though their tribe is located in Southern Oregon, they have a lot of tribal members that live in the Portland area, and they had been complaining to the tribal government leaders and the tribal housing program that they needed to have affordable housing. And as you all know, it's really expensive in these inner city environments for rent. So we needed to have more affordable housing. And but one thing we didn't anticipate was that by introducing the Indian Housing Block Grant, introduced a little provision which we didn't know about, and I should have known about because I used to work in tribal housing, that there's this what's called a 30% rule, which means you can't charge the Siletz units, those 20, you can't charge anybody in those units more than 30% of their income. And if their income is zero, that's their rent. And so that created an urgent, an unknown gap in the project. And we're not going to be able to get to bank financing until we close that gap. And I found out about that as the project was actually almost underway. So next slide, please. How does tribal preference work? The first preference goes to Siletz tribal members, and then the second preference goes to, if they can't fill those units with Siletz, then it goes to the second preference of anybody who's in another federally recognized tribe, or 5 other tribes that are grandfathered into this legislation who are not federally recognized. Almost all of them are on the East Coast. One of the things we didn't anticipate is the way we did the lease-up process, because we're focusing so much on the Native tenants, the Siletz, and the other tribes, that we filled our initial waiting list up with a lot of Natives, and we ended up with 83% of the units being Native households, which was huge for us. And our other properties didn't have that same experience. When we leased up, we didn't have Native preference. And one of ours actually, I think it was less than 10% initially. I think we're up to close to 15% now. But just having that Native preference at the beginning was so huge. And one of the other things we found out in this project is it was really hard. And the reason why it was hard is because it had never been done before. And I didn't know that going into that. We were the first ones to bring in a tribe as an investor with their Indian Housing Block Grant, where they're investing in a project through a nonprofit, and they transferred that tribal preference to the nonprofit. So that had never been done before. And that's why it was so hard. And I feel like I aged 20 years in about a year. Next slide, please. So getting that rental assistance was so important to us. We had to fill that gap. And one of the challenges we had was that the local funders didn't understand tribal preference. They didn't know the difference between a race-based preference versus one that's based on sovereignty. And this was a relationship that the Siletz tribe had with the federal government that's legal and political. It's not race-based, but we still had local leaders who just couldn't get past that and thought we were trying to do something illegal. And even when they realized it was legal, they didn't feel like it was fair. Why couldn't they do this to other people of color communities? And we had some others who were non-native who also pushed back on this and constantly asking us to prove it. So that was a little difficult. And some of the tools we had was really persistent outreach and really strengthening our relationship over time. It took many months to get this project completed, and the lease-up process was extremely challenging during the COVID environment. And then if you recall, but we had some pretty big fires out here. And so we were suffering with incredible smoke for over a week that just grounded everything ground to a halt. So we had some real challenges in the lease-up process, but it was because of our partnerships that we had that really helped us muscle through all of this. We also had to do quite a bit of legal consultation because this was a new kind of a model. Our legal bills were enormous. And we're doing this again on another project, and it's not going to be anywhere near like that because we've already done it once. So we have some, and it's also the same partners. So we're happy with that. And also leveraging our financial resources and also our staff was really important throughout this process. And then those two local entities really helped out. The local housing authority called Home Forward, they came up with $200,000 a year for rental assistance for the 20 units. And that was a real challenge. And we had to go all the way to HUD headquarters in DC to get them to approve this. And then they gave the housing authority that ability to do so. So that was hard. That was a nail biter, and we didn't get that until after we were already starting the lease-up process. So that was really difficult. And then the Joint Office of Homeless Services, they also came in later with subsidies for 10 families as long as they've been formerly homeless. So those two together helped the project pencil out. Next slide, please. And so here we are with the ribbon cutting, and it was a great day because I remember being there at the groundbreaking ceremony. You saw the people everywhere with the shovels, right? And everybody's smiling. I was screaming on the inside because I just found out about that 30% rule, and I thought, oh my God, this project is going to fall on its face. And we kept the faith and actually got to the ribbon cutting ceremony, which was a joyous occasion. And the lessons learned for the next projects are listed here. We want to build on those partnerships early on in the process. That is so key. And also understanding all the funding restrictions because we just didn't know. So lessons learned there definitely. So we know now in advance. And communication. We had regular meetings with all the partners, and I'm an executive director of a large organization, but I took the time to go to all those meetings. And I took the time to focus on all that art. And because of that, and the leadership from the other organizations, we were able to push this project over the finish line. So if you're going to take on something that's important as this, you have to do that regular communication. And it's still occurring even after the project is done because we are now serving a community for a long time. So we have to be strong together. We have to be flexible and adapt to changing needs, which I think we had to do this year with the challenges of 2020. I think we need to continue to educate the public entities on the Indian Housing Block Grant. And now that it's worked, everybody is saying, oh, we were there for you at the very beginning. Well, some were. Others, it was a bit of a challenge, but now they see the great benefit here because we're actually getting people moved out of homelessness into affordable housing and really taking a concerted effort to reduce native homelessness. And we have those two other projects in the same neighborhood, about the same size. So we're doing what we can to reduce native homelessness. And all those barriers with the federal and state housing funds, working through those, a big one is the tax credit law for low-income housing tax credits. There's actually a prohibition of combining Section 8 vouchers with low-income housing tax credits in the law. And so we've alerted leadership in the native housing world and some of our local and state and federal partners to help us advocate for changing that law. So, you know, I mentioned this project is very close to NARA. NARA has a fairly robust Native youth homelessness program, and we have a broad range of services for our youth and families that's dealing with a broad range of things like homelessness, drug and alcohol, mentoring, obviously working with the schools, and domestic violence, foster care, economic development, new home ownership, emergency energy. The list goes on and on and on, but it's all centered where we are youth-centered, we're family-driven, we're elder-guided, and that is why I am so excited to see this next presentation because it is something that I look up to as a model for the work that we do at NARA. Thank you.
I'm going to introduce our next speakers. I thank you for that exciting presentation, Paul. I particularly love the notion of a project that is youth-centered and elder-guided. There's something really catching about that combination that is very attractive, and I appreciate your sharing that with us. I'd like to introduce our next panelists and co-presenters. Angela Gauthier is a licensed marriage and family therapist and the associate director of the Ein Da Young Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. Angela has been with the center for 12 years and has experience in housing and shelter services, family programming, Indian Child Welfare Act advocacy, prevention programming, and clinical supervision. In her 12 years, she has spent 10 of them in program management, which includes program development, grant writing, and budget development and management. Angela has also been involved in the implementation and administration of the local homeless services referral system and works to ensure the voice of culturally specific providers and those we serve are always elevated and present in the discussions. Outside of her professional duties, she is the mother of 2 children, ages 4 and 2, who keep her and her husband very busy when she is not at work. Angela enjoys home projects, baking, cooking, camping, and hiking, and reading in her free time. Her co-presenter is Travis DeCory. He is Sichangu from the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. Over the last 20 years, Travis has worked in a variety of positions at the Ein Da Young Center. Currently, Travis oversees the Nini Janisag, or Our Children program, as well as filling the role of cultural specialist at their new site, the Mini Oshki Ein Da Young. The Nini Janisag program focuses on culture as prevention, addressing issues such as chemical abuse, tobacco abuse, and suicide awareness and prevention. Thank you. Please welcome Angela and Travis as our next presenters.
Hello, thank you everyone for joining us. I am excited for us to have an opportunity to talk about our project after hearing from our previous presenters. I think we have a lot of overlap in our experiences and also different approaches on how our organization work to overcome similar barriers that Paul and Amy shared. So excited to share that with everyone. So you can go to the next slide. Just as a brief overview, we'll talk a little bit about the history of Ein Da Young Center and our services, the application of cultural services, so how it's integrated throughout our programming, and then lastly, securing a place for culturally specific housing services, which will be similar to some of the presentation from previous about how we address these barriers to open our new project, Mini Oshki Ein Da Young. Next slide. Oh, you can go ahead. Just pictures. Just a little history of our organization. Ein Da Young Center has been in existence since 1983, but it was started by the Red Schoolhouse, which was a school in St. Paul that was founded in 1972, and it was specific for Native youth. When the school realized that there was issue of homelessness and housing needs with their student body, they opened Ainda Young Center. You can go to the next slide. They opened Ainda Young Center to house their students. And so that's when we first opened what is now our emergency shelter. And the mission of Ainda Young as a whole is to provide a healing place in the community for American Indian youth and families to thrive in safety and wholeness. Go ahead, next slide. Go ahead, next slide. Just a quick overview of our services. We started out as really an emergency shelter, providing housing, but we've expanded to be a full social service organization over the years. So these are the three housing specific services that we have. We have our emergency shelter, which is 10 beds, ages 5 to 17. We're unique within the world of youth homelessness because we take youth as young as the age of 5. Most of our local shelters start at 12 or 16. This allows us to keep a lot of sibling groups together. And so we take youth that have come in themselves because they've run away, their families may be experiencing homelessness, and the parents want a safe place for their children to come. And we also take youth who are in need of emergency placements because of child protection interventions. So we work very closely with our local child protection systems as well. We also have a transitional living program, the Beverly A. Benjamin Youth Lodge, which is a 6-bed transitional living facility, and that's for 16 to 21-year-olds. That's an 18-month stay. The emergency shelter is much, briefer of a stay, like 30 to 90 days typically, where transitional living is up to 18 months. And our newest housing related project, we are new to the housing world at Ainda Young Center, is Minooshki Ainda Young. We opened and started housing our first residents in November last year. It's a 42 unit permanent supportive housing program for 18 to 24-year-olds. And we have all of the services from housing case management to Travis's work as culture and suicide prevention, mental health care, safe harbor work, etc. You can go ahead. Next slide. We also have additional services that support, like programming that supports the housing and community-based supports. One of our programs, the street outreach program, is done in collaboration with a local organization called the Streetworks Collaborative. And that is a group of youth serving organizations from across our metro that come together to provide youth specific street outreach. This has been really vital that we've had this service, and Ainda Young Center has been involved in this collaborative. There have been moments in time where we maybe were down a couple of outreach workers or something. And during those times, what we see is that no Native youth end up being assessed for housing when we don't have Native specific, we don't have outreach workers housed at Native specific organizations. So they're really important in reaching the youth that we serve. Our newest programming that we've added is our Safe Harbor programming that focuses on being able to provide mobile case management and on-site case management to youth that have been sexually exploited or trafficked or are at risk of. So we're really excited to be able to offer that as an added service. Next slide. So the last services that I'll talk about is our family and prevention services. So Oyate Nawaji is works with families that are in child protection, at risk of entering child protection. They do a lot of advocacy and group work. We've had family advocates who go and help parents paint and clean up the inside of their house. They help get them to medical appointments, complete their child protection case plans to reduce the amount of time that they have child protection involvement. We go to all of the court hearings for emergency protective service, like if there's going to be a removal, to try and offer services to families. We have a special case manager that works really closely with the county so that families, any Native family that enters child protection, whether or not they're eligible for enrollment and therefore have ICWA protections, this Nokomis Circle liaison goes in and helps the families walk through the child protection process, understand what their rights are within child protection, and also works really closely with the child protection workers to try and ensure that the case plans are culturally appropriate and something that will actually benefit the family. And then the last part of that program, and something that we had the second court monitor ever in the nation. And so we go into court within our local county and we monitor all family court for ICWA compliance when it applies. We work really closely with the judges and county attorneys. We publish a quarterly newsletter about compliance, how people are doing in the courts, areas of concern, and then we try and highlight areas of policy change. One of the things that came out of this was the creation of an ICWA court and just better court processes for families when they come in. The way that the courtroom is set up, medicines are available, having proper representation, all of that came through some of the ICWA court monitoring. And then lastly is our Nini Johnny Sug program, which Travis is going to get into. So I've passed that to you.
Okay, can we go to the next slide? So the Nini Johnny's Hug program started around 1995, 1996. And what we were finding is once kids were coming into the shelter and finding placement, we wanted to make sure they were still connected with their community no matter where they were placed. So we have CD prevention, tobacco prevention, and suicide prevention. Can you hear me?
Good.
Okay. Okay. Next slide, please. So we're going to show a short video, and then after the video, I'll talk a little bit about why we did this. So if we could just roll that video real quick.
Okay guys, I got my rose hips and now I am here at an undisclosed location on the east side of St. Paul, and I'm in an empty lot which happens to have this incredibly gorgeous flat cedar tree. And so again, before you harvest anything, you want to make sure you put down your tobacco.
You feel like using drugs, when you feel like drinking, you know, you have to think about those things. Take your tobacco, you know, put it out someplace. Learning to pray is important. You know, I take my tobacco and I put it by a matig, by a tree. You know, a tree has life. It's powerful. And we pray to those matigs, those trees, but we're not really praying to the tree. praying to the Manitus, to the spirits.
Yeah, you can stop the video there.
So we always wanted to show a little bit about what we've been doing because of the times that we're in with COVID. You know, culture is important. A lot of these youth that come in when we open up this new building, they're coming into their homes and they're still got that street mentality and the stability that they need. Something that we want to focus on and providing different activities for them to replace some of the things that they were doing before was really important. But how do you do that with what's going on right now in the world with COVID? In the past, we would go out to, because we live in an urban setting, we have so many different representations of tribes here. We have Ojibways, we have Dakotas, Lakotas, we have Senecas, we have people from the East Coast, the West Coast. So how do we work with them and provide teachings for them specific to who they are? So what we were doing is we were going out to South Dakota, the reservations out there, different communities, Montana, North Dakota, Wisconsin, working with toll chunks, and going out to the communities and taking the kids here so they could see what was going on in their communities and other people's communities. So what we decided to do with COVID is to host that summit online. When we did that, you know, I was really hoping for, 500 to 1,000 kids because we were opening it up, to everybody. But we were really surprised. We actually got over 40,000 participants to participate in what we did there. Can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, I moved ahead too far, didn't I, there, Angela?
No, you're good. Just go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so so right now we're dealing with that. And when we opened up Minneoshki, a lot of these, like I talked about, a lot of these kids really had, when I'm talking with them, they really had no idea who they were and where they were from. And having that identity is so important to, staying sober or getting sober. During these times of COVID, a lot of kids are really struggling with, loneliness, the suicidal ideation that's really hard to talk about. And so by using a cultural component, we're able to connect with these kids and talk to them about things that they've never had opportunities to do before. So that's a really unique thing about our program. And so we started with youth that were 8 years old, working with kids up to 17. Now we're working with 8 to 25-year-olds. And the really great thing about the program that we have, because they can stay in it for so long, is every youth that's been in the program for a year has graduated from high school, which is a really big, something that we're really proud of here. If you see in the video, in the slide right here, when we opened up Minneoshki, you can see some residents getting their keys. And one thing that we talk about a lot, because we live in the Twin Cities, is, identifying as Native. We have a lot of, like I said, we have a lot of different tribes here. So, Angela, do you want to go ahead and talk about the?
Yeah. So as I kind of said with that history of Indayang, that, our emergency shelter opened in 1983. We purchased a home for our transitional housing in the mid 90s. And that was kind of based on what we could purchase, what we could get. For us going on this new journey of entering into housing and opening Minneoshki Indayang was the first time that our organization had really engaged in a large scale capital campaign, that we had the ability to design a program from start to finish to be something that could serve the community and wasn't just purchasing a place that we could provide services. And so we had this really great opportunity. So again, it's 42 units. The entire space was created and designed to be a identifiably Indigenous space, similar to what Amy and Paul said, that went into every aspect of it. The metro area that we're in, we're located in St. Paul, but for those of you that know, this area is typically referred to as the Twin Cities. Minneapolis, which is across the river, has really prominent Native community. There is an area that is referred to as a cultural corridor. Everyone goes there for their services. And St. Paul did not have that for the Native community. And so us creating a space that wasn't just for our residents, but for the community at large, to have a place to gather, a place that they had ownership over within St. Paul, was really important for us. So we can go to the next slide. This is just a video of our residents moving in. And like Travis said, we're in a metro area. Most of our residents are multiracial, and it's interesting to just be able to work with them in navigating spaces and their experiences, you know, and needing cultural services across the board. So we can just play this.
This is nice. It's so spacious. They got racks and everything.
So this was our first move-in day, which was really exciting for us. We had some delays in construction and things like that, and we were on the verge of winter, which for us in Minnesota is a, you know, dangerous and scary time for people that are without housing. And so we were really happy to get everyone moved in before the weather really turned. A couple of things for us is we fought very hard to be able to have community space in our building. We wanted a basement where a lot of our programming space was going to be. We wanted community gathering space on each of the floors for the residents, but that wasn't initially supported for housing funding. They want every space to be an actual apartment. And so we really had to fight, and we were lucky to get some supporters that were able to say and came to understand that those community gathering spaces were as vital to the services as just the actual apartments and housing in general. We can go to the next slide.
I just wanted to note that it's almost 2 p.m. And for those of you who have a hard stop or must leave now, I've inserted the evaluation survey link in the chat box. So if you must leave, I'd ask that you complete the evaluation survey just to help us with guidance and to give feedback to our presenters. And I'll stop now and let Angela continue. Thank you.
Yeah, and so I'll just kind of go quickly, but the things we're working with the city to have a sweat lodge on site. We have medicine gardens in a private garden that's on the outside. We built in art gallery space to feature art from local artists and from our residents. We have teaching kitchens and gathering spaces on each of the resident floors. Next slide. Those were just some pictures of the gallery space and the mural, and kind of to get a sense of what the building looks like. You can go to the next slide. So the role of culturally specific housing and the to end homelessness. We want to go to the next. So the systemic risks really for culturally specific housing. For us, the development of the coordinated entry system was going to dramatically impact the way that we provided services, how culturally specific services are funded, and the lack of understanding from greater community about the needs for culturally specific services. Paul and Amy kind of talked about that, and so I won't go into it too much, but very similar, not understanding the need, why you kind of want to have that carve out, etc. So we can go to the next slide. So for those who don't know what coordinated entry is, this is just the definition. It's a process developed to help ensure all people experiencing a housing crisis have fair and equal access to housing, which sounds great. And actually, in theory, I don't disagree with it. We've seen some benefits within our community that we are reaching people who typically probably wouldn't get housed through the housing system because they have higher barriers, they're harder to engage. But there's things that it impacts. And part of that is the way that people are assessed into housing and the need for it to be in compliance with fair housing. So prior to this mandate, when Native youth would show up at other shelters or programs, those programs that we had relationships with would contact us and say, hey, I have a Native youth, I think they'd be great for your housing. But this process was going to cut off that referral string. And so it would just be get an assessment, go on a priority list. Someone says they have an opening and whoever is the first available person would come. We knew from nationally that other places that were farther ahead of us in the development of this process were not getting Native referrals from their coordinated entry system. And this was coming online and we were working in the development of our system at the same time we started our capital campaign, Formino Oshki Indayang. And we knew that this project that we were developing and believed so much in was going to be at risk of not actually being able to serve its purpose by housing Native youth. Next slide. Again, this is just, we can go to the next slide because sorry, I'm trying to get through this so fast. So what we really started was an initiative to figure out what a solution would be and how we could still serve our population. So next slide. So what we know and kind of where our starting point was is that we know like across the board that Black, Indigenous, people of color communities are overrepresented within homelessness nationwide. Like systemic problems and racism have been a cause of these disparities. I think it's crazy that I have to say this so many times in circles, but that like Indigenous people don't have higher rates of homelessness and housing instability because they're Indigenous. It's because of their experiences within the system and barriers and racism. And that homelessness looks different in communities. And we have a system to address homelessness that was built using kind of a stereotype, a perspective of what it looks like to be a male, chronically homeless, white, chemical dependency, mental health needs. But that isn't the only, and all of our definitions and services, like in a homeless continuum response system, I think this was the jumping off point of how stuff was created. So next slide. So the solution for us was we reached out and had some legal aid, and they looked at the federal mandate for coordinated entry and fair housing to help us find some solutions that were within our legal bounds to be able to house Native youth. So the local continuum of care, the COC, can use available data and look at their homeless population to see who is overrepresented within their population. And the federal mandate allows for continuum of cares to have a targeted response to homelessness for populations that are overrepresented. Next slide. We worked to have a policy passed that would allow for the targeting within our COC. So it did mean that our COC has to adapt their assessment for homelessness, which have it focus more on the experiences of those who are overrepresented and within the system, instead of like being a deficit-based assessment. And so if you show up and you say, yes, I'm, I identify as Native American, there's sub-assessments that would be triggered with questions that focus on experiences of removal of lands, history of boarding schools, experiences of historical trauma. And the same would be for other culturally specific communities that would be considered a protected class under fair housing. So if you identify as African American, there's going to be questions about, the history of slavery and redlining, all of the things that systemically have caused the issues of disproportionate homelessness within these communities, and put it back on the systemic issues instead of on an individual. So the push that we really had was like making this change within a COC is that you're really making like a political statement, essentially saying that we are actually focused on equity and breaking down the systemic problems and barriers, and not putting the burden of this issue on people as individuals, and focused on personal deficits. And lastly, what this process does is it works to identify programs within the COC within your continuum of care that provide culturally specific services. What we've experienced is a lot of those programs don't want to be involved because they feel like it's a system that doesn't work for them and doesn't work for their population. And so then they're avoiding, which makes them vulnerable to not be able to access all of the funding that they could and all of that. And so we've really been advocating on a local and state level, and now more on a national level, that we need to build systems that work for everyone. And that's how you're going to get increased participation and actually start seeing changes within the needs of your homeless population. So next slide. So the outcomes of these changes, again, just to ensure that Black, Indigenous, people of color experiencing homelessness can be housed in programs built for their unique needs and experiences. Currently, the policy, we've passed a policy in our local COC, but we have been talking with HUD to be able to present this as a potential solution for other organizations nationwide. And we believe, again, that it'll lead to better outcomes within communities. You're going to see more housing stability, increased employment, education, greater, positive community participation when people are able to receive services from organizations that really can meet their needs. Next slide. I think that was it. So that's a little of the work that we have been doing at Ainda Young to really move forward culturally specific housing. I think it's really interesting to hear how organizations are managing this in other parts of our country, and that there are multiple approaches and solutions. The thing that I really took away from hearing about how, NARA and NARA were handling this is that there's a lot of barriers for organizations like ours to provide these services. And there's a lot of education that has to happen on every level. We can never just show up and be operating from a place of assumed understanding or like the same starting point. We always are having to do a lot of that pre-work. But I'm excited to see that there's so many places that are really fighting for this and helping push some of it forward. So thank you all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Angela and Travis. I appreciate your observations. Let's go into our polling questions and then we'll go straight into a Q&A. Again, polling question. We're going to ask for you to pick your option. How comfortable do you feel about discussing the concept of safe havens for homeless youth? Take a few moments to reflect on the content and discussion you've been part of and select your choice on comfort. The second polling question is, how would you rate your knowledge of healthcare prevention and disease management programs for homeless youth? Again, reflecting on the presentations and your option about your knowledge. While you're selecting that poll, I'm going to turn to the panelists and do something slightly different. I know that it's nice sometimes to overhear a discussion among experts. So I'm curious if anyone from panel 1 or panel 2 has a question for their co-panelist that they'd like to begin our conversation with. Paul, you may have a question for Angela, or vice versa. Angela, you may have a question for Paul. If you don't, I've got a backup question or two.
Well, I wouldn't mind knowing from Angela how you were able to get this whole thing started, because getting to where you are now is, I'm sure, quite the journey. But what was it that really helped you move this to where you are today? What was the driving force behind it? What happened?
Are you referring to like the policy or just the project in general?
The project in general, but you can talk about the policy too.
Yeah, well, it, was really our executive director, who's been with our organization for about 11 years, had been a long time focus of hers to really extend our continuum of services. Our big concern was that when youth were turning 18, trying to extend the amount of time that they have access to youth-specific services and really prevent them from entering into the adults like homeless world. We thought we could add some additional support. It definitely took a lot of partnership and with our like local housing agent, state agencies, support from our local like representatives and from the city. We worked with a lot of youth as well in the design of the building, where it would be located, what city it would be in, and what they would really want in it. And that from there, everything kind of, just took off and advanced. And it's a long 4 years and complicated and also a whirlwind all at the same time.
Thank you. I appreciate your honest assessment. That's wonderful. I'm wondering if again, Angela, Travis, if you might have a question for Paul or Amy, that would be great. In the meantime, I did want to acknowledge a question that's in our chat box, and I'll just read it straight to you. Paul, this is for you. Thank you, Paul, for this discussion on housing that is not race-based, but based on sovereignty. Native American Connections in Phoenix is facing this very same issue, not only with our housing applicants, but also our HUD Continuum of Care coordinated entry prioritization. Paul, I'm wondering if you'd like to react to that observation regarding sovereignty versus race.
Well, it's certainly a problem in Portland too, and I think Amy experiences the same thing, and that generally in an urban Indian environment, we are lumped in with other people of color, but having that connection with a tribe who had data from their tribal membership in the Portland area saying that they were demanding affordable housing, that really helped the tribe along in realizing they needed to start making some investments. But they didn't, this Indian Housing Block Grant money, it's a lot of money, but it's not near enough to even serve their on-reservation needs. But they found a way that they could invest through a nonprofit. They could take their much smaller investment and leverage all this resource. So the project itself was around $18 million, and the tribe's investment was well less than that. But with this small investment, they saw that they get 20 units for 25 years, and it's guaranteed, and they didn't have to do it. They just have to participate and make sure that they're a part of the project and continue to serve the community. But having that really helped and opened up the eyes for the local jurisdictions that we work with, that this is now a new tool in the toolbox. So for other urban Indian communities across the United States where you have tribes that are in the area, if they have data showing that their urban Indian tribal members are in great need of affordable housing, I think you could actually develop the same kind of a relationship with them. It does require strong relationships and strong partnerships, because we did more than just build a building. We actually created a community that we need to nurture now for many years to come. And so it's a long-term partnership.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Go ahead, Angela. I'm sorry.
Actually, I was going to ask this, and this kind of is exactly on line with it. For the Native preference and your relationship with the tribe, do people have to be enrolled members of the tribe in order for that to apply?
Yes, the answer is
Okay.
yes. Yeah, they have to have, or at least have one member in the household.
That was something early on that we had looked at. We experienced some issue with the youth that we serve, not a lot of the youth that we work with not being eligible for enrollment. And so that was, that has always been something that we've talked about, but then just had Native identified. But we also received some support from two local tribal communities, one of which provided the rental assistance for 5 of the units, which is really nice, because any of our privately funded units we can fill outside of the coordinated entry system. And so we don't have to abide by like the housing definitions and things like that. But they didn't, because it wasn't block grant money or anything, it was, we were able to still house people if they weren't eligible for enrollment. So
thank you.
That's why we didn't do 100% Indian Housing Block Grant units. We only did 20 out of the 59, because we knew we had tribal members that they needed housing too, even if they're not enrolled.
Right.
And also, we just want to be careful. And in hindsight, we're really glad we did, because that rental assistance gap on those 20 units. So that was a good move on our part. But definitely, you want to continue serving the urban Indian community who are not enrolled. And so that percentage we have, the 83% for the whole building, that's both enrolled and non-enrolled.
I was gonna also mention, kind of when you had given that statistic, when I was using the method that we did, we ended up with 85% of our residents identifying as Native American. And so I was excited that it worked. Kind of like what you were saying, it ended up being more than what I expected. So.
Yeah, I would add too, I mentioned that we have 10 units that are filled through that coordinated entry system. And we have worked out a process where, as part of that coordinated entry, individuals are asked if they want culturally specific services for Native Americans and for other populations. And so we are only referred individuals who answer yes to that question. And so, they may skip the top 5 people that are on that coordinated entry list until they get to someone that identifies as wanting culturally specific services. It's not, we still get people who do not identify as Native, but answer yes to that question, and that creates some challenges at times. But overall, it has really worked. And for those 10 units, those are all filled, not necessarily by tribally enrolled individuals, but all individuals who identify as Native American.
Thank you. Wanted to make the observation that the link to the evaluation survey for this session is in the chat box again. And for those of you who are departing, and I'd like to encourage you to please complete our survey so we can get feedback from you, and of course share it with our wonderful specialist presenters and experts who have been part of this engaging panel. We'll take a few more moments for maybe one final question for anyone who is burning to get an issue into the chat box. Take a couple moments to start typing away. There's been a lot of expressions of gratitude and acknowledgement for the presentations, and I think our audience was very appreciative of everything you brought to the table and your observations as well. Just want to alert everyone that the slides and this recording will be available on our homepage, and we'll share that link with you once it's available. We'll make sure that everyone who was registered will receive an email reflecting that information. So any final questions? Again, it will be shared via email. I appreciate everyone's patience with us. Although we went over time, I think it was well worth it to have the discussion. And again, a lot of expressions of gratitude in the chat box. I was curious if there are any closing thoughts from the panelists as we round. It's at 2:23. Maybe a couple of observations or final remarks you'd like to make, Paul or Amy or Angela or Travis. You've said it all?
Maybe I could just say thank you again for the opportunity to be here. And I know the communities that we're all serving across the United States are really challenged right now, and
yes,
just really hope everybody continues to stay safe and encourage the community to get vaccinated for the COVID virus when that becomes available. So thank you again.
I thank you very much, Paul. I'm so glad we were able to put this panel together, and we'll ask you to, for the interested participants, to keep your ears and eyes to the ground. There is a session 3 to our community of learning that'll be held January 26th. In 2021. That presentation will be about best practices and referrals for youth services, and we hope you'll join us for that. We'll continue the dialogue and share more detailed information with you. I want to thank everyone who's been able to join us. Again, thank you for your patience, and I hope you're at home clapping. I'm raising them up to say thank you to our panelists, and really genuinely appreciate the hard work and effort you've put into today's presentation. It's been a great dialogue, and I want to express my gratitude to all of you for being participants in this effort. With that said, we're 24 minutes over time, so I think it's time to let everyone go. We'll yield back the rest of your afternoon to you. And again, we appreciate your joining us, and hope you can join us on January 26th for session 3 of the Homelessness Community of Learning series. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.